middle school. First one officer, then two, appearing to body slam a 14-year-old.
The 14-year-old student behind the counter, the officer a few feet away. He is manhandled, grabbed around the neck, and slammed to the ground. This was just the beginning. The two grappling on the floor. At one point, the officer appears to make a punching motion at the student. Officer Anthony Dupree then picks the teen up in an apparent headlock and pounds him to the ground before jumping on him. Watch as that employee again moves the gun out of the way. Another officer, Dan Cipriano, walks in. They handcuff the teen, stand him up straight, and then slam him face first on the counter.
Police officer body slamming a female high school student has triggered outrage in a North Carolina community. Cell phone video shows Rolesville police officer Ruben De Los Santos yesterday picking up the 15-year-old and throwing her to the ground. He was responding to a fight between two other female students at the town's high school near Raleigh.
Hands behind your back. Give me your hands. Give me your hands.
The videos that were previously featured demonstrate how police officers escalate situations with physical violence against the underage students. Such actions can be results of the zero tolerance policy. Zero tolerance practices are punitive ways to discipline students in the United States K-12 schools. Through zero tolerance practices, students who violate schools rules are suspended and expelled no matter if the violation was minor. According to Christopher Bucanfuso and Megan Kufeld, zero tolerance practices were first used in the prison system, and in the 1990s, schools implemented them. Bucanfuso and Kufeld also state that the zero tolerance practices were first implemented in schools to punish students who took guns to school. The policy later expanded to student suspensions or expulsions due to bullying, fighting, use of drugs and alcohol, and even minor misdemeanors such as swearing and wearing certain types of clothing. In 2013, AB 420 policy was passed in California, in which prohibited schools to suspend or expel students in grades K through 3rd for committing minor acts of disobedience. Therefore, we are proposing to amend the AB 420 policy by creating the Eradicating of Zero Tolerance Practices policy. And rather than simply having K through 3rd students, the new policy will extend to K through 12 students. This policy will eradicate zero tolerance practices in schools, and it will also implement restorative practices. We intend to specifically target the Inland Empire with this policy due to its high minority population. Minority students, especially Latinx, Black, and students with disabilities, are disproportionately affected by zero tolerance policies. So eradicating zero tolerance policies in these schools would make a large impact. Our policy intends to amend AB 420 to include students across K through 12, especially middle school and early high school students. Our reasoning behind this is that students in 7th and 8th grade lose a significant amount of instruction days, double of rates of students across all other days. According to David Washburn, suspension in middle school and early high school increases the chances of students dropping out, so it is important to ensure middle school students are essentially being pushed out of schools by zero tolerance policies.
This policy has been implemented in many schools but has not shown any improvement in student behavior. Instead, it has aided in reinforcing the school-to-prison pipeline. This affects many students' behavior and education.
In addition, school resource officers no longer serve to promote the general safety of schools by being on hand in the case of an intruder or a disaster, and now instead serve to police the student population by giving out citations and suspensions for dress codes or violently escalating behavior issues and fights through physical force. The following clip by AJ Plus provides an in-depth explanation as to what the school-to-prison pipeline is and what its effects are.
The school-to-prison pipeline. It's a term that describes how American kids get pushed out of public schools and into the juvenile and criminal justice systems. Basically, harsh zero-tolerance policies in schools have led to more suspensions, expulsions, and even in-school arrests. Getting suspended or expelled means more time away from school, and it doesn't take an honor student to figure out that's bad news. In fact, expelled and suspended students are more likely to get held back a grade, end up in juvie, or just drop out altogether. And dropping out of high school makes you 3 times more likely to get arrested. Back in school, forget about hallway monitors. Students these days often have to deal with school police. Minor offenses that might have landed you in the principal's office back in the day can now actually lead to your arrest.
The statistics shown, provided by the Scott Foundation for Public Education, are particularly troubling when it comes to ending the school-to-prison pipeline. Students who are suspended or expelled, especially under zero-tolerance discipline policies, are more likely to fall behind in class and drop out of school altogether. They are also more likely to wind up in the criminal justice system, and students of color are being disproportionately affected by these discipline policies. This is unacceptable and reveals a systemic inability in our education system to provide all students with an equal opportunity to learn.
Overall, zero-tolerance policies have yet to create a welcoming and humanizing environment for students. In the following video, published by Cassidy Friedman, a restorative justice coordinator addresses the issue of not having restorative justice practices in schools.
We don't get to the bottom of the fights, we just suspend them. It's a misconception that if I punish this kid hard enough, they won't do what I punished them for doing. The only interaction that these kids are having one-on-one with teachers is when they're getting in trouble. And that's what the outside world too. They don't have cops pulling up to them, asking them, are they having a good day today? They walk over dead bodies on their way to and from school every single day. And nobody stops and asks them, are they okay?
Our goal is to hopefully reduce the number of suspensions and expulsions within K-12 schools nationwide. We wish to implement this new policy that addresses both major and minor misdemeanors with the help of emotional and behavioral techniques that incorporate restorative justice practices. Faculty will also be a part of making this policy a successful implementation. Overall, we hope to have less students fall into the school-to-prison pipeline. This new policy offers zero-tolerance alternatives. These features include a more responsive form of communication, greater support for students, and a more inclusive setting for each school. These alternatives will be more supportive rather than punitive, and it would be concerned with students' growth rather than controlling students. The following video by Cassidy Friedman is a clip filmed in an Oakland school which illustrates how restorative justice looks in the field.
So I think what I've done and why have I done it? Like stealing, talking about inappropriate stuff, not being respectful.
Where did you learn that behavior?
Learn my lesson.
I found with doing restorative justice work, we interrupt that cycle. At first it's wowing to them. It's like unbelievable that this man is asking me about my personal life in a way that seems like he actually cares.
With additional help, such as considering a professional agent, it would allow an opportunity to focus on how to better the student individually. This system would be very transparent. All of the staff and several community members would be trained on how to treat and discipline students by creating an inclusive setting where students would feel comfortable enough to communicate with the resources surrounding them. In addition, we would provide more training for school resource officers. These trainings would consist of better mediation tactics. In the videos shown earlier, officers handled situations in an aggressive manner that would have been unnecessary if school resource officers were properly trained in mediation tactics.
If we are not able to de-escalate issues between students or decrease the amount of behavioral issues they exhibit through the use of mediation by teachers and school resource officers, then we will utilize the use of school psychologists as an additional resource for at-risk students. To help ensure this is an inclusive policy that is considerate of the people who it will affect, we will begin to implement this policy by gathering various stakeholders such as teachers, administrators, and students. We will begin by first putting this policy into effect in a few schools by contacting their school committee boards and implementing the policy on a school-to-school basis. This will allow school districts to gradually ease into the new policy in a manner that is not overwhelming. We then hope to expand this policy to reach various school districts within the Inland Empire. Some of these include the Rialto Unified School District, the Chaffee Joint Unified School District, and the Riverside Unified School District, among others. We also hope to increase the incentive for schools to adopt our policy. We will do this by offering grants to schools that comply with policy standards, which includes a decrease in the amount of school days students lose due to suspensions and an overall decrease in behavioral issues and expulsion rates.
Recent years, some of California's largest districts have made significant investments in restorative justice. much controversy has risen in regards to the amount of funding being spent towards restorative justice practices. However, school district officials that have implemented restorative justice report that RJ has directly reduced suspensions and improved school climates. In an EdSource article on the rise of restorative justice, research found that 5 years ago, Santa Ana Unified School District had nearly 9,800 days of suspensions, which cost the district about $680,000 because state funding is calculated based on average daily enrollment. Since then, thanks to a grant from the Federal Department of Education, the department has invested more than $3 million in restorative justice and related programs and has seen its suspensions drop by 75%. The cost of suspensions and expulsions can dramatically affect educational funding and support.
As we plan to use restorative practices within our classrooms, it is important that we provide educators, SROs, and school administration with the adequate training to effectively implement these tactics. The numbers shown are provided by a program called Restorative Practices, which provides summer training to school affiliates. The workshop, Introduction to Restorative Practices in Schools, will cost about $450 per workshop and will be available to all faculty and administration within a school. It will introduce fundamental values and restorative practices to the participants. The workshop, Restorative Mediation and Conferencing, will cost about $300 per workshop and will be targeted for SROs and teachers. This conference will offer restorative mediation practices and teach personnel how to manage discipline issues over the span of 2 days. Lastly, active implementation and evaluation will cost about $450 per workshop. This workshop will offer an evaluation plan that will help personnel fully understand how to monitor restorative practices and ensure that they are properly implemented within their schools and district.
To ensure our policy is effective as possible, we will need to consistently evaluate the outcomes of the policy as it's implemented. We're able to do this by first monitoring whether there is a significant decline in behavioral issues among students as they begin to move through the restorative justice process. We don't expect there to be an immediate and drastic change in students' behavior, but we anticipate that through our 3-step plan and attempts to create a comforting environment for students, there will be a steady decline in behavioral issues. Second, we will monitor the suspension and expulsion rates of students at the end of the school year, and a decline in the number of students who have been expelled or suspended will be an indicator of whether the policy is effective. Lastly, it's important to receive feedback from teachers, administrators, and students as to whether this policy has impacted them in a negative or positive way. At the end of the day, this policy is meant to serve and support these populations in the best way possible.